Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. So we are here for a special PowerZoom to celebrate Women's History Month and the remarkable contributions of women to our city, our state, and to our nation. It is especially awesome for us to host this Zoom with the recent memory of Vice President Kamala Harris having just been inaugurated. For me, as the father of 3 little girls, when we were watching as a family, watching the Vice President being sworn in, first it was really amazing and inspiring, and a lot about the promise for what I know will be more progress in our nation in the future, in the years and the decades ahead. To mark this moment, we are so proud to have as our speaker a great champion for New York, representing us in DC, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. So thank you for being with us. And here to introduce the senator is Samantha Rudin Earls. Sam is a proud and passionate and dedicated New Yorker. She's a leader in the real estate industry. She is a philanthropist and one of ABNY's newest board members. She is also the chair of ABNY Women, the group that made today possible. Sam, over to you.
Thank you, Stephen. And I'm grateful to be here today on behalf of ABNY and ABNY Women to mark Women's History Month. And I'm thrilled to welcome United States Senator Kirsten Gillibrand to the virtual stage. The celebration of Women's History Month began to take shape in 1981 with Women's History Week. And since the mid-90s, presidents have issued proclamations to recognize the contributions of women over the course of American history. As a nation, we commemorate women from all backgrounds and their achievements in various varied professional disciplines. We think of trailblazers in science and industry, creative forces in arts and culture, and tireless advocates in government and public service. In New York, we honor and salute the likes of Grace Hopper, an ace mathematician, naval lieutenant, Edmonia Lewis, the first sculptor of African American and Native American descent, and Eileen Collins, the first woman pilot to pilot a space shuttle mission. We celebrate these women alongside the legacies of Eleanor Roosevelt, Shirley Chisholm, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And we find inspiration in the numerous and acclaimed accomplishments of women spanning from Sonia Sotomayor to Amanda Gorman. When we formed ABNY Women in 2016 as part of the broader ABNY network, we sought to provide a forum to civically engage women to come together to share and address the pressing issues affecting women in New York City. We also felt the call to recognize and honor the deep tradition of women who have heeded the call to civic action. And we are lucky to be joined today by one of those inspiring women, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. Senator Gillibrand was born and raised in upstate New York, where she attended Emma Willard School in Troy, the first all-women high school in the United States. After graduating from Dartmouth and the UCLA School of Law, Senator Gillibrand clerked for the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. She served as special counsel to U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development during the Clinton administration and worked as an attorney before being elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 2006. During her time in the House, she became the first member of Congress to publish her official schedule, leading a movement towards transparency and accountability in government. In early 2009, New York State Governor David Paterson selected Senator Gillibrand to fill the upper chamber's seat left by Senator Hillary Clinton's appointment as Secretary of State. Senator Gillibrand then won the special election for the seat in 2010 and has served the state of New York in her role as senator ever since. Senator Gillibrand led the movement to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell, wrote the Stock Act to prohibit members of Congress from benefiting from insider information, and battled to secure permanent health care and compensation for 9/11 first responders. And she has been outspoken in her advocacy for small businesses and for hardworking New Yorkers. What's more, Senator Gillibrand has always championed the women of New York and women all across this country. She has sought to further economic empowerment for women and she supports raising the minimum wage, affordable childcare, universal pre-K, and equal pay for equal work. As we will learn today, Senator Gillibrand has introduced the Family Act, which would create a national paid leave program for all American workers for about the cost of a cup of coffee a week. We are eager to learn more about the bill and the many initiatives that Senator Gillibrand has on the agenda to keep New York and the nation moving forward. Please join me in welcoming Senator Kirsten Gillibrand today. Senator Gillibrand, we're listening.
Well, thank you very much, Sam. And thank you to everyone for your advocacy and for the great work you do for the state. I really appreciate it. I also want to recognize ABNY Chairman Stephen Rubenstein for his leadership. I want to recognize CEO Melva Miller for her leadership, and everyone involved with this organization for all that you do every day to keep New York City moving forward. I'm especially grateful for your critical work getting New Yorkers counted for the census. As we work to recover from the pandemic, the federal resources our city and state receive is based on census data. And that is now more important than ever, especially to typically undercounted communities like low-income communities, immigrant communities, and communities of color. Those are the same communities that unfortunately have felt an outsized impact from this pandemic, and the longstanding inequities have been deeply magnified. The American Rescue Plan is working to address those inequities and get critical aid to every community. Families are receiving relief checks and expanded child tax credits right now. Small businesses and restaurants are getting access to the PPP loans and revitalization grants. And our state and cities are getting resources for government services and transit systems like the MTA. But that relief package was about meeting the immediate needs of the moment. Now we have to look to the future with clear eyes. We know that this will not be the last crisis that we face as a nation. If we are going to rebuild the economy for everyone, we need to invest in bold new ideas that build a country where every community is ready to meet the opportunities and the challenges of the future. To truly build back better, we need to create transformational programs and policies that rethink infrastructure and rethink how infrastructure impacts our community and the economy. That literally starts by looking at the way communities were constructed, like during the Robert Moses era, when highways were built to cut straight through the heart of communities of color and low-income communities like the Bronx, where they broke up neighborhoods and cut them off from the local economy. Many of the highways and bridges built under that harmful mentality are reaching the end of their useful lives. My bill, the Build Local, Hire Local Act, recognizes that fixing each one of these highways gives us the opportunity to rebuild those communities the right way. By hiring from the local area, we can create family-supporting jobs where they are most needed. We can train new workers who can build and maintain our infrastructure for years to come, and we can spur economic recovery in communities of color hit hardest by past infrastructure decisions and the pandemic. Every new job that we invest in should be an investment in building communities that aren't just ready for the future, but creating it. I have a plan to harness the unmatched talent and innovation of American workers to create a new green jobs economy, investing in new jobs to build solar, wind, battery power, to develop electric cars, high-speed rail, to design and construct energy-efficient buildings that will build economic and environmental resiliency, and to help us respond to the global climate change emergency. These jobs put us on a path to sustainable prosperity, net zero carbon emissions, and world leadership in clean energy. I also want to create a green jobs core that gives young people the chance to serve their country while getting on the job training that they can use for the rest of their careers. Making investments in public service jobs is a way to invest in the infrastructure of our communities that goes beyond just roads, bridges, sewers, railways, and buildings. We know that the network of people who serve as special education and home health aides, social workers, public defenders, first responders, government workers, and more help our communities together. That past year has really reminded us just how critical all of our public servants are. I want to make those careers available to everyone by offering debt-free colleges to those willing to serve in their local community, the same way the GI Bill does for those who serve in the military. In just one generation, we could change the character of the country by offering a new answer to the question of what can you do for your country. It would bring a whole new cohort of people into public service, and in doing so, expand the reach of critical programs that families rely on today. All of the programs will help more Americans reach the middle class, but we need to have better economic infrastructure if they want to stay there. Even before the pandemic, too many families were just one emergency away from a disaster. Then COVID left working parents to face impossible choices between staying with their children who were homesick or doing distance learning and earning their paycheck. Millions of women have actually left the workforce entirely. And it's not a coincidence that many of these women are women of color who were more likely to have essential jobs that require them to work in person and often leave them more likely to not have access to paid leave. We need better supports to provide stability to families, companies, and our economy. And we need to make childcare accessible and affordable. And we need universal paid leave. Every worker at some point will need paid leave to care for a sick child, a sick parent, a spouse, manage a serious health condition, or take home a new baby. My legislation, the Family Act, will give access to every worker 12 weeks of paid leave, and it would allow the United States to finally join the rest of the industrialized world who already offers paid leave. We also need to add a new option for financial services to our existing economic infrastructure, one that every family can access. Today, 1 in 4 Americans are unbanked or underbanked, either because there's no bank in their community or because they don't have funds to access bank services. Every year, hardworking families are forced to spend $100 billion on predatory payday loans and check cashing services just to access their money. It's really expensive to be poor in this country. That's why I want to put a not-for-profit bank in every post office. Postal banks would offer small dollar checking and savings accounts, debt cards, and low-fee ATM services to help families start accruing wealth and to stop dollar loans to help them start businesses or get through times of crisis. The Postal Service offers an elegant and simple solution. They have the real estate. There are over 30,000 post office locations everywhere from rural communities to inner cities. They have the experience. The U.S. Postal Service offered postal banking from 1911 to 1966 and still processes $20 billion of money orders every year. And they have the constitutional obligation to provide the same service to all of us, an obligation no private bank has to meet. Throughout the nation's history, Congress has looked at moments of crisis and come together to pass policies to reshape broken systems. When the Great Depression showed the desperate need for jobs, public works, and a safety net, Congress passed the New Deal programs as well as Social Security to do and address that. And when civil rights movement showed the need to address racial and economic disparities, Congress passed LBJ's Great Society policies. We need to respond to this crisis with ideas of the same scale. This is a moment that we should be thinking big. This is a moment to build bold new programs that create new jobs and industries and to enact transformational policies that create fairness and economic opportunity everywhere. this is the moment to create a new kind of infrastructure that can address the problems of the past and build the future we all want to live in. I'm so glad to have partners like you in this work, and I look forward to answering all your questions.
Thank you so much, Senator. That was a lot of great ideas, and I love your comment about this moment in time requiring us to come up with ideas of the same scale as the Great Deal and the New Deal and the Great Society programs. And I'd love to hear more about that and unpack some of the things that you talked about. But first, I'd actually like to talk about being a woman and being a leader in this country. As we recognize Women's History Month, it's important for us to highlight powerful women leaders like yourself. And as a woman in a male-dominant workplace like the Senate, though we are making huge strides, it's still mostly male-dominated. What advice would you have for women working in male-dominated industries?
Well, first of all, believe in yourself. I remember coming out of law school and working at one of the really great firms in New York City. And I remember thinking that gender bias doesn't exist anymore. It's modern time. And I found out over several years that that really wasn't the case. And I watched more men move forward to make partners than really highly qualified women. And I recognized that there just seemed to be some hurdles that still needed to be overcome. So I would just suggest to any young woman to believe in yourself, don't give up, fight hard, know that you are capable, qualified, and able, and you should dream big. There's nothing wrong with having big dreams and big aspirations. That is what the country needs. And so I would just encourage them to stick with it. And if they do find impediments in the way, that you just have to overcome them, and you can. And to ask for help, try to find a mentor, try to find a sponsor. And then when you do get somewhere, make sure you keep that ladder down for the next person and make sure you are a mentor or a sponsor to someone else.
Yes, thank you for that. And also mentioning sort of paving the way for those coming behind us or after us. And, extending sort of that ladder, that arm, because sometimes,
Yep.
we forget that, and it can be tough, but I think that's also an important piece that sometimes we forget. So thank you for that. Also wanted to talk, a little bit about, sort of the place of women in the workplace in terms of unemployment. You talked a little bit about it. And, over the past year, as communities and families have struggled with COVID-19, it has been evident that women have been disproportionately affected, right? And we've talked a little bit about that today. Many women who've been forced to make difficult decisions between caring for their families and their loved ones or earning a paycheck. And, we see that, right? Female workforce participation has already dropped. I think the number is like 57%. The lowest it's been since like 1988, I think. And, just in December, there was a Fortune article that noted that, women accounted for all of the net job losses while men achieved some gains. So I have two questions for you around that. One, as a working mother of two children, the difficulties of balancing work and home life. How have your experiences as a working mother pushed you to create legislation and be that advocate in Washington to benefit working families and mothers? And two, how does the Family Act specifically aim to combat women having to make these impossible and challenging decisions in the future?
So when I first got elected to Congress, I had one child who was 3 years old. And during my first term, I was pregnant with my second. And so by my second term, by the time I was appointed to the Senate, I had a 6-month-old and a 4-year-old. So I know the juggle that a lot of working moms face. Unlike most working moms, I run my own office. And so I could set my own schedules, create my own standards, and make it a family-friendly place. Most workers don't have that capability to set their own rules. That's why I've offered paid leave to all my employees, and they are allowed to take it for any life event, whether it's a sick or dying parent, a sick spouse, illness themselves, new child, any real need that they have, they can take paid leave. And frankly, if we'd had paid leave before this pandemic, we could have kept a lot of people in the workplace. They could have been home for 3 months while their child learned remotely, not lost a paycheck and not lost their place in that company. We didn't have it, and so now we're desperately trying to build it. This most recent COVID package has pandemic paid leave in it, which is a tax benefit for employers that give it, which is not what I want long term. I want it to be an earned benefit so that you purchase it over time yourself, so it's always yours and it can't be taken away. But being a working parent really showed me how important daycare was. So for example, when I was first elected, and before, when I was just a lawyer working in upstate New York, having a high quality daycare where I could bring my toddler so I could go to work is really important. And a lot of people don't have it. They don't have affordable quality daycare. So that's why I think universal pre-K is necessary. So you have a whole year where kids are in school so parents can be working and they get that early childhood education. And we need affordable, accessible, quality daycare. Right now in our state, for every one child that needs daycare, for every 8 children looking for daycare, there's 1 slot. Before the pandemic, for every 4 children looking for daycare, there was 1 slot. So we are really under providing an essential service. And so I have a lot of policy ideas around that. I think daycare should be a business deduction. I think we should give benefits to employers that offer on-site daycare. I think we should incentivize companies to create a daycare program. Anytime I walk into labor unions and say, what policy do I think could help you? I always say, offer daycare as members. Like it's the one thing young workers need more than anything, to know that their kids are safe and learning and thriving while parents are at work. I lived it, so I know how important it is. I wrote a paid leave plan for my first law firm that I worked, or second law firm I worked in, because they didn't have paid leave, because I knew that people need to be able to stay employed and meet the needs of their families. So I've lived it. I see it. I think it matters. I think it's why women in Congress matter so much. It's why I started off the sidelines to ask women to run for office and then to fund their campaigns and raise money for them, ask women to be advocates, ask them to vote. Those things really matter because our lives are different and our life experience is often unique, and it's necessary that we have a voice in these decisions that are being made every day.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I love the idea about offering incentives for childcare in the workplace. You know, as we think about working from anywhere, which has been a trend that started before COVID, but really has been exacerbated. And we've learned that, you know, a lot of employees have the option and can work from, you know, non-traditional workplaces. I think it's important that, you know, a lot of the commercial real estate owners and landlords think creatively about how to use the space. And I think I love that idea as a way to not only support and keep families and women in the workplace to accommodate things like childcare or elder care, but it's also an adaptive reuse of space that I think you know, we are struggling to find purposes for. So I love that idea. So just to go, I'm sorry?
Thank you.
You're welcome. So just to go back to the American Rescue Plan, which will provide immediate relief to American people. But as we look into the future, there will always be people who in some way need relief in some kind of way. And you have called for making aspects of this plan more permanent, which will provide emergency enhanced benefits for the poor through things like food assistance and tax credits. What do you think, and you talked a little bit about it, but if you could just elaborate, what do you think are some of the long-term solutions needed to be enacted now, despite the relief that's on its way from the American Rescue Plan?
Well, paid leave, which I already talked about, I think we should make it permanent and fully fund it and have it be an earned benefit. Also, the expanded child tax credit and the earned income tax credit are one of the largest investments this country has made in working Americans in the last half century. The child tax credit and the EITC together lift more children above the poverty line than anything else, 5.5 million children. The American Rescue Plan will lift another 4.1 million children above the poverty line, which would cut the number of children in poverty by more than 40%. So permanently enacting this historic provision along with the EITC provision, which will stop the federal tax code from taxing millions of workers without children into or deeper into poverty, would be a landmark achievement and would also help reduce child poverty for a generation. So that's one of my priorities. Also, when it comes to food assistance, we increased the benefit 15% for SNAP benefits, and that I think should be long-term. It's just an outrage that there's people across our country who go to bed hungry, especially children and especially the elderly. So I'd like to have that increase be permanent as well.
Nice. And, you know, in talking about sort of our economic recovery and sort of this bill and what it will do, you know, something that we are consistently looking at as we work to make New York City a better place for all is looking at those unemployment numbers. And I know your office has reported that about 850,000 New Yorkers are unemployed as we move into the second year of what is one of the worst sort of economic downturns that we've seen in recent history. And it's also been estimated that a tax cut to firms to create new jobs would be the quickest, most effective measure that we can take to create new jobs right now. But in addition to those tax cuts for firms, what other solutions do you see to decrease the unemployment numbers?
So one of the ideas I have, there's two that I think are really important. So one idea I mentioned, the Build Local, Hire Local bill, that will train a whole new generation of workers who are unemployed today into building construction trades and to be able to have these extraordinary professional skills that will earn their way into the middle class. The second idea is to allow people to do public service. I would like to have every college graduate, every high school graduate be offered a year or two of public service in many careers, in green jobs, in military and intelligence and healthcare, in education, and create a national public service so that you create a gateway into these careers that are needed, number one, because they're public service, and number two, often we have shortages. We have a nursing shortage in this country right now, a teaching shortage. We need people to want to go into these public service careers. And so I think if you could offer debt-free college for anyone willing to do public service. So if you do a year of public service, you get 2 years community college. If you do 2 years of public service, you get 4. You would just create a gateway. And I would offer that to any person unemployed or underemployed. And so you could then gravitate workers into the careers that we needed. One of the things I got in the last bill was a health force, which would train tens of thousands of people in healthcare. Because as you know, our doctors and our nurses are overwhelmed in the hospitals. They're exhausted. We need another generation of healthcare workers, and you can train these young workers or new workers in healthcare to be the ones that can go to the vaccination centers and just do vaccines all day long. So we don't have to draw our other healthcare professionals away from urgent things they need to do. So those are two ideas that I think could transform the unemployment issue in our country and reshape the industries that people go into to the industries where we need help and where are good, middle class jobs.
Great. And I wanted to go back to the idea of the new local hire program in a minute, but one of the things we talk a lot about is sort of building capacity and skilling up New Yorkers around non-traditional sectors, emerging and growing sectors like the tech sector, here in the city, in certain nodes and concentrated places like Long Island City, biotech. I'm really interested as we work to not only prepare the next generation of workers, but making sure that these training programs are done equitably and that we grow an equitable economy. What are some of the things that you see would help sort of help sort of disadvantaged and unrepresented communities sort of attached to those jobs, right? So, you know, if you're looking at local hiring programs and construction jobs that are created by DOT-funded infrastructures, how do you see that this really benefits New York in terms of aiding these disconnected communities and making sure that these jobs are going to the communities that have suffered the most during this time?
Right. So Build Local, Hire Local does that directly. So that's why I'm trying to get that passed as part of the Build Back Better bill, which is our next infrastructure bill. So they will be prioritized for job training for those jobs, and those jobs will be done in their communities, which again just creates a pipeline of work and investment that will bring prosperity to those communities. Second, there should be a priority for this public service degree for communities left behind. And so you will be reaching into communities of color, communities with language abilities to take on some of these public service jobs and the full range. I mean, we need more foreign language speakers for our intelligence services. We need more people of color to aspire to public safety, so that we have more diversity in our public safety ranks. There's so much need for community leadership in public service that you could be giving lots of communities that would typically not be recruited and geared towards these jobs to do these industries. We also do it for STEM. That's why the Green Jobs Corps is so important. I want to gear more grade school and high school kids into STEM so they can be the Green Jobs Corps, because they'll need the science, technology, math degrees to be experts in wind, solar, geothermal, hydropower, battery technology, energy efficiency, energy efficient building. All that takes technical degrees and technical skills. We do it on a not-for-profit basis in the city already. One example of a not-for-profit that does this very effectively is Perscola. And they have trained over 800 workers in tech jobs who were just dissatisfied in their careers or didn't like the path they were on. And they would take these workers and give them free training into areas like computer skills, coding skills, programming skills, and they are now employed in tech jobs. And the way you build the training is how I want to build the public service training. You go directly to the employers and say, what jobs do you have open? What skills do those jobs require? And then that's your coursework. That works. It works in upstate. It works in New York City. It works in lots of tech sectors. So that is my vision for how you create these training programs and to make sure there's full equity in those training, in those who are asked to train and those who are recruited to train.
Right. So let's just change directions for a little bit. I mean, we talked a lot about job creation, and we know infrastructure is definitely a way that we can create a lot of jobs very quickly, and we've seen it throughout history. But in talking about sort of transportation, something that New Yorkers rely on heavily, public transportation, and in order to function, right, in our daily lives, seeing the effects of the pandemic on transit across the city is alarming to many people, especially when there was fears that we were going to see service cuts, knowing that there was a deficit in transit budgets to perform the services that we need normally, but also we need to expand and upgrade. Why should New Yorkers feel more at ease knowing now that there is $5.6 billion coming to New York City transit agencies? And what does this money allow these agencies to do really for New Yorkers?
Right. Well, first of all, this money will prevent another fare increase, because if there is something New Yorkers don't need right now is that their transportation costs go up. But secondly, this will allow for our transit agencies to provide maintenance, which helps our trains stay safe and running on time. It also helps them plan for the future for projects like the new Gateway Tunnel to replace other aging tunnels. So this money really does matter, and it will help us long term.
In talking about capital, something else that we talk about a lot, and a lot of in recent sort of discourse in the city has really been about public housing, not only just affordability, but NYCHA in particularly. And we know alongside Senator Schumer, you recently announced $600 million in funding for public housing in New York that will help address housing insecurity, increasing health and safety measures for public housing residents, and really to develop and modernize public housing properties, which we know are in desperate need, from anywhere from technology and access to Wi-Fi down to the basics of, lead removal in public housing. Why is it critical that this money is delivered to the Capital Fund program? And how is this money from the American Rescue Plan being allocated to other areas in the US for public housing?
Well, I've heard so many stories of people who are living in public housing, and they're shocking in terms of some of the circumstances people are being forced to live in. Public housing in New York is in dire need of federal funding to address the massive backlog they have right now for repairs and improvements. NYCHA is estimated to need more than $30 billion in repairs and maintenance alone. The Capital Fund is the main source of federal support for public housing authorities to develop, finance, and modernize public housing and to improve management. I'm also grateful that we were able to get in $600 million in funding to New York for the fiscal 21 spending bill. And I'm also a co-sponsor of a bill called the Public Housing Emergency Response Act, which would provide another $70 billion to the Capital Fund to address necessary maintenance and improvement to the overall living conditions. Our bill, the ARP, included $21.55 billion in emergency rental assistance, again, so people don't get evicted, $10 billion to help people experiencing homelessness and those at risk of housing insecurity, and then another $139 million for rural renters and homeowners, and nearly $10 billion to support homeowners' mortgage and utility needs. So we've tried to make housing a priority because obviously people getting kicked out of their homes or being forced to live in unsanitary or unsafe conditions, it's just not what this country should be about. So it's a priority.
Yeah. In thinking about sort of, the living conditions of so many New Yorkers and so many people living around the country, and thinking about all of the things that they have to deal with, and then COVID-19 on top of it, I want to just switch really quickly to talk about, and this has come up in the Q&A, this has come up through our members, and it's on everyone's mind, about how New Yorkers, how lately we've seen people around the country, but especially in New York, horrible attacks on racial hatred against our Asian and Asian American brothers and sisters, and they've died pitifully. And we know sort of the Asian culture is key to the vibrancy and a culture of New York City in itself. And to see these attacks are really disheartening to a lot of us. Just would love to just hear your thoughts. What are your thoughts about it? Do you have a plan to address this in the Senate? I know, a lot of your colleagues have been working on this, and a lot of, for instance, member Grace Mang, just want to really hear your thoughts about that.
So unfortunately, over the last few years, racism has really risen in our state and in our country, from racism, bigotry, anti-Semitism, misogyny, anti-Asian, anti-immigrant. And during COVID specifically, the Asian community has been hit so hard by racist attacks and violence. And so we have to work much harder in designating white supremacy as not only hate crimes, but I believe domestic terrorism. And I just recently joined the Intelligence Committee, and domestic terrorism will be one of the things that we not only have hearings on, but we'll hopefully write legislation on. I think the anti-Asian sentiment we've seen is very much along the lines of white supremacy that all this other bigotry and racism has also been linked to. And the disinformation that President Trump spread and the violence that he inspired really needs to be addressed aggressively. And so I'm going to work with our intelligence partners as well as the FBI to not only designate these crimes as domestic terrorism, but then create budgets and legislation to actually root it out and arrest and prosecute those who hold those views.
Thank you. We appreciate that. And I know you have to leave a little early today, but I just want to just wrap it up with two additional questions, and we can end. I left the tougher questions to the end, but the first of the last two questions is something I'm very personally interested in, because I remember when you were appointed by Governor Patterson to the Senate, but having served both in the House of Representatives and the Senate, I'm really interested in sort of what the transition was like from one position to the other. I mean, we were used to seeing a woman in that seat, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't, pushback or disgruntled, member of the colleagues around that. But I'm really interested in understanding sort of what that transition looked like for you, and was this the path you saw your career taking?
Well, I had never imagined actually that I would be a senator, except for when I was about 7, when my sister asked me, what would you like to be when you grow up? And I said, a senator. But I didn't know what a senator was back then. So I didn't really imagine it. But it was a great opportunity. When I talked to my husband about whether I should even put my name in for consideration to take Secretary Clinton's position when she was elevated, my husband asked very simply, can you help more people in the Senate or in the House? And I said, you can help more people in the Senate. I would be responsible for helping 20 million people as opposed to 600,000 people. And he said, well, you're only in this job to help people, so you should at least apply for it. And I did. And I was blessed enough to be given that opportunity. The difference between the House and Senate is just the diversity of your portfolio changes. You have to meet the needs of 20 million people who have more diverse economies, more diverse communities, and just more complex issues, because it's not just one part of the state. And so I learned very quickly about a lot of the challenges that other parts of the state were facing. And then I worked very hard to build a team that could really meet the needs of the state, and how I could be the best advocate possible for all communities in the state. And I think we did that over time. I've now been serving for 10 years in the Senate, and I'm, I think, ranked 37th in the Senate. So I am definitely among the more older and wiser, not necessarily by age, but by experience. And I feel it only helps accrues to New York's benefit. I have the blessing of getting to work with Chuck Schumer as my partner in the Senate. And he also has decades of experience and is so effective. And now being the majority leader, he has the chance to be even more effective. And I just feel so blessed that I get to be his partner and get to serve the whole state. The great thing about Senator Schumer and I is we really do complement each other. I've been on the Ag Committee for 10 years, the Armed Services Committee for 10 years, Environment and Public Works for 10 years. His experience came through judiciary and finance. Now being the majority leader, he doesn't do committees. But our areas of expertise really do complement one another. And I found that together we can represent this state in a very powerful way. So I feel very privileged and very grateful that I've had the chance to serve in this way. And I am grateful for my family for supporting me and allowing me to do this, because it's not an easy job and I'm often working, but my kids and my husband are all in, and we like to do this as a family.
Well, thank you. And we appreciate your leadership, and we are very happy that you are there. You've been a leader on many very important issues for not only us here in New York, but for the nation. And that brings me to the elephant in the room. My last question, recently, claims of sexual harassment by men in power have dominated headlines, including Governor Cuomo, right? And as an advocate for many of us when it comes to reforming sexual harassment and sexual assault justice laws, specifically in the military and on college campuses, how do you think such allegations should be handled now and in the future?
Well, first of all, every allegation of sexual harassment and sexual assault has to be taken seriously. Unfortunately, that is not currently the case in lots of places. Right now, I've been working on trying to change the way we deal with sexual assault in the military, and change how they create a justice system that's more worthy of the sacrifices the men and women who serve make. And I'm actually moving closer and closer to getting the 60 votes I need to pass that bill. on a widely bipartisan basis. We also have challenges on college campuses, and I have reforms that I would love to get a vote on to change that. In workplaces, people are still having to sign non-disclosure agreements as part of employment contracts, meaning that if they are harassed or assaulted, and if they do report it, that they are then silenced. They cannot speak about it if there's a settlement, and it really does make it impossible to change the culture in a workplace if you're not allowed to talk about it. So the work I have to do is very long and very hard, but I am dedicated to doing that work because everyone deserves to have a workplace free of harassment and assault and discrimination. And it takes a lot of work. I worked hard with Senator Cruz, obviously a Republican, in changing the rules here in the Senate. We did not have a proper process for someone who was harassed or assaulted to report those crimes. And we did not have a fair process for people who wanted to come forward and be heard. So we worked hard to fix that and to make it better. It's better. It's still not perfect. We still have more reforms that are needed. But again, everyone has the right to work in a workplace where they can thrive.
Thank you. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for being a leader in this space. We need it now, we need it before, we need it in the future. So thank you. Continue the good fight. And thank you for joining us today. And I will bring Stephen back on and Sam back on to close us out.
Thank you.
Senator, thank you so much. Sam, Melva, thank you so much. I send you that nothing rings true more than the best ideas we have in our lives we have when we're 7 years old. And so I'm grateful you had that idea then, and we're grateful that that has materialized into your leadership now. Thank you. And please call on us if you need help. We are here.
Thank you, Stephen. And thank you for your leadership. And thank you to Samantha and Melva. You've been such a great team. And thank you for everyone who joined the call. I appreciate it. And I hope I get to see more people in person soon.
Yes. Thank you so much.
God bless. Stay safe. Thank you.
Heroic work.
Thank you. God bless you all.
Thank you.